Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. From Peterson's, I'm your host, Taylor Sienkiewicz, and you're listening to You Have a Cool Job, a podcast highlighting those who took their profession in a unique direction and what they did to get there. On this week's episode of You Have a Cool Job, we talk to a man who makes a very specific piece of equipment, the mouthpiece of a trumpet. Peter Pickett owns Pickett Brass Mouthpieces and Blackburn Trumpets, a company that started in his garage. To start things off, I asked him what initially interested him in trumpets and the instrument production world.
I'm a mechanical engineer by background, but I also have a degree in trumpet performance, and so I've always had an interest in making things, whether it's music or mechanical parts and such. And so when I first moved out to Lexington, Kentucky, I worked for a printer company, and so I was working in the engineering world, but I was still playing. And so on the side, I made a few parts for my trumpet, and so we made finger buttons, and that was it, and I made them by hand. And so little mechanical parts that made my trumpet look kind of cool, but quickly that business dried up because people don't buy a lot of trumpet buttons for whatever reason. And so we moved eventually into mouthpieces, and mouthpieces are something that people replace. It's very personal. It's like your shoes, that they fit you. You like what they look like. You like what they feel like, and it's much more personal. So the mouthpiece thing has since been a much better business model, and it's much more diverse and much wider ranging across multiple instruments and certainly lots of different players of varying abilities and styles of music. So that's how, long story short, we got to making mouthpieces, and that's really the backbone of our company now.
Okay, and so you have you're a mechanical engineer, you said, and is that your education background as well?
Yes, so I've got a master's in mechanical engineering and acoustics and a Bachelor of Arts in trumpet performance.
Based on this education background, it may seem like Peter had his path pre-planned. However, he explained how this wasn't necessarily the case.
It was one of those things of very fortunate choices made along the way. In hindsight, it all makes perfect sense, and it looks like I had a grand vision. But like most lives, it was happenstance and happened to be at the right place at the right time. When I went to Virginia Tech, it was mechanical engineering. I like making stuff move. I like designing things. It was cool. But I quickly ran into the music department at Virginia Tech, which was extremely supportive and thought it was cool. And so I got to play a whole lot. And about halfway through that, I quickly realized that I'd have enough courses and playing time to get a double major. And so that was a no-brainer, but it also kept me involved with the music program heavily. And then when I graduated with those 2 degrees, I decided to stay for a master's, and I was doing active noise control. And it was also apparent that I could apply all the acoustics work to the instrument, the trumpet. And so it was rather convenient to put my 2 interests together at that time. And that sounds great, but I didn't get an acoustics job when I left school, and so I was in printer design, which was not acoustics, but the interest was still there, and I was still playing quite a bit, and so it all eventually came back together to have a nice music-based business that got to leverage a lot of the engineering work.
Yeah, that worked out perfectly, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how did you identify that specifically mouthpieces were something that people needed or wanted to buy frequently?
Sure. So the trumpet is really just 2 parts. It's the instrument and it's the mouthpiece. Mm-hmm. Those are the 2 parts that people buy. And the trumpet is 100 pieces and parts all put together, and that's really hard. And a mouthpiece was a single part. And so that was the more way to get into the business, a little bit easier as opposed to tackling a whole large instrument. Also, mouthpieces are much less expensive, so people are more willing to buy them. It's not a hard item to price, whereas trumpets, that's a very, very personal instrument. And so in order to be somebody, you would really have to do a lot more marketing. It'd be a much harder hill to climb than a mouthpiece brand. So the mouthpieces were solid after a few years with, some key people. And, we're not huge or anything, but persistence and just showing up constantly has helped us get a foothold. And it's a much more easier business to get into than the instruments.
Okay, so are there not a ton of other mouthpiece companies, or is there something that differentiates you a lot?
Sure. There are a lot of us, small and mid-sized companies, and the industry is very small and very collegial. We all know each other. We all get along. Everybody's got a little bit different design. People will send us somebody else's mouthpiece to copy, and we'll measure some things off of it. But what we create is a personal design for that person, as opposed to ripping off a bunch of other people's designs that I know that doesn't make any sense. And so it's a very collegial industry. And one thing that sets us apart is that we have just a slightly different design that we believe strongly in how it feels and how it plays. And that doesn't mean that it's God's gift to mouthpieces. It just means that it's a combination of parameters that works for a lot of people. And for some people, it doesn't work. And I tell folks, I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you don't like it. It's like me not liking your shoes or not liking your shirt. It's okay. You like it. It works for you. I don't like it. So it's a very personal kind of product. And so everybody has a place there, and there's no company that's going to come out tomorrow and probably put me out of business, versus some other kind of singular technology solution. This has been a decades and centuries long kind of business that continues to evolve, and we continue to make a unique place for ourselves. And second of all, it is just a mouthpiece. So not only does the mouthpiece differentiate us, but also just how we work with people. We try to be nice. We try to be considerate. We listen. Everybody's different. Everybody has a story. And the fact is, we don't have all the answers. And so a lot of times we're not selling a mouthpiece to somebody. We're selling a story. We're selling feelings. We're selling hope, optimism to say, hey, this is a new mouthpiece that might help extend your playing career, and they get excited about it. And we share in that optimism and excitement. And so people buy the experience that we offer them when they come here.
Okay. And how does that work? How does it extend people's playing time?
Yeah, so when you're young, it's like an athlete. When you're young, you're strong, you're resilient, and a lot of times you've got a lot of brute force that overcomes a lot of inefficiencies. And as you age, we become less strong and less resilient. And so in order to have the same level of performance, we have to prepare better. We have to have more efficient equipment. We have to be more efficient in our approach and how we do things. And our part in that is helping you find efficient equipment that doesn't make you work so hard. And that's how all the great athletes and players have extended their careers, is to find more efficient equipment that lets them still do what they can do. But honestly, they get better because they're still pretty strong and they're finding more efficient equipment. So that extending that career is whether you have a physical change like new teeth. We have people show up with new teeth all the time. Or whether your muscular structure has changed, you've had surgery, or you're called to play a different gig that you haven't been able to play before. Our job is to help you find the tools that allow you to still get that done without hurting yourself.
Okay, and that's where the specialization of having a new mouthpiece comes in instead of getting the whole trumpet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And then going back to the niche environment of mouthpieces for trumpets, how you said it's a small community, so it sounds like it's very collaborative. But how does, aside from working with other people's models, do you collab with other companies on anything else, or how does it all work in such a small market like that?
So in a small market like this, there is room for everybody, because every trumpet player has way more than one mouthpiece. Mm-hmm. And so just because you buy company A does not mean you're not going to buy company B's mouthpiece. A lot of times, a lot of our players buy one from everybody. And so a lot of times we learn about our competitors just by what customers say. I like what this one does for me here. I don't like this. I like this. And then it gives us an opportunity to come up with a unique solution. And then I know our mouthpieces end up at other companies, and people say the same thing. And so in addition to working with customers on that, we work with other companies. We do a lot of OEM or original equipment manufacturing for other companies. And so if you wanted to Taylor brand a mouthpiece, you would say, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to write Taylor on it, and I want these 3 sizes. And these are the kind of players that I work with. And you and I would work together and come up with a unique line for you. And then we'd give you those finished mouthpieces, and you would go sell those to your customers. And a lot of times, the customers that you then deal with are ones that we would never see, that would never either hear about us or come to see us. You have a unique personal connection with those folks that then we can be a part of.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. To distribute that in other places. So Peter, can you tell me the story of starting this business? How did you get started? What was that process like?
Sure, that was a completely unconscious process. So I had a little garage behind my house, good romantic story like that. And these little finger buttons that I was making by hand, I just bought this really cheap lathe, and I had it set up on a bench. And you go out after dinner and you make some chips. You take some brass and you cut a button and you make a mistake, and so you start over and you do it again. It is a very romantic story in that regard, and it grew slowly for probably the first 7 or 8 years because I wasn't taking it very seriously. There was demand that was following, but I wasn't really thinking business. It was interesting that people would send you money for these parts, but certainly no thought to the growing a world-dominating corporation or anything. So yeah, it's a small behind the garage kind of thing. We did move at some point several years later for more shop space, and then we kind of jumped in with both feet on the mouthpieces. We started making them on a small machine we had, but there was a company, Hardinge in New York, a U.S.-made CNC lathe machine, and they were blowing out some end-of-line stuff, and they were giving them away. And this is a machine that is made for massive manufacturing needs, and not this cute little guy in a garage behind his house. But it was too good an opportunity to pass up, so we bought this Ferrari machine, and then it seemed like overkill. But now we still run that machine, and it runs all day. And so we took a couple kind of blind-in-the-night chances on some big equipment like that investment, but it kind of forced me to grow into it as opposed to starving my way through it and running up against limits on people wanted things and I couldn't make them. So we've not had that problem. We've always been ahead of the curve in growing that from several years later.
Right, it grew very organically, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. And that's the only way to grow. We could have probably marketed our way faster, but I don't think it would have been as solid of growth. I think the organic thing, as frustrating as it is and as slow as it is in this very slow business, because again, this is an industry that it lasted centuries. And so people come out with new things and they're like a flash in the pan. And it's not a big enough industry in order to make your billions of dollars and get out. You've got to stay in it in order to make it work, to make it sustainable, and to honestly make it more fun to show up and be in business.
Right. So would you say in an industry that's so traditional like that word of mouth is about your reputation is better than trying to do your own marketing?
Oh, absolutely. There is nothing like word of mouth and reputation. I mean, that is everything, because it goes both ways, right? I treat you poorly and I send you bad product. You tell your friends, right? And that is deadly, especially this day and age, because all that word on the street is what people see now. So if the word on the street is poor, but all your marketing says you're great, what are you going to believe? I'm going to believe my friend who said, man, that guy is not any good. So I think that's a much more solid situation to rely on than trying to market your way and tell people what you want them to believe. Let them come up with their own conclusion. That's way more valuable.
So you didn't have a business background necessarily, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So what did you learn going through this process of starting a business?
So, a lot of people will say, well, it's just common sense. You need to make more money than you spend.
Right.
But when you're in it, I tell everybody that comes here to work here, I say, I run this from a very emotional, off the top of my head kind of business, but it is emotional. I want it to feel good. I want to be excited to come to work and not be like, ugh, I got to go put the nose to the grindstone and work all day. And so sometimes I'll admit that I don't make the best business decisions, but I make the best environment decision. So, we just redid a bunch of lighting in the shop. It cost several $1,000s. Did you really have to do that? The lighting was fine. Well, but the place looks a whole lot cooler now. And so now when people come to visit, they go, man, it looks really awesome here. And you're suddenly starting off on a better foot with somebody, as opposed to they walk in and they go, ugh, it's dirty. Or it just feels blasé in here. Now there's a feeling and an experience that they can experience instead of me explaining it to them or telling them how to feel. You can't tell somebody how to feel, and that not only goes for customers but employees. And so now they come in and go, man, the coffee's really good, and this lighting just feels cool. Man, I want to work here. And so I think a lot of those things have propelled the business, not from so much a business standpoint, but from creating a culture and an environment that it's set up to be successful. So as long as we don't make any completely boneheaded decisions about spending money or overspending, I think the word of mouth, the organic growth, and the culture that we have here ultimately makes for a more solid bedrock and hopefully longer-term success as opposed to short-term, flash in the pan kind of success.
Of course, yeah. And when you got that machine to be able to start mass producing things more or make larger quantities of things, is that more when your business took off and you could quit your other job, or when was that switch?
So we bought that machine in 2008, right in the midst of the recession stuff. We were able to secure financing by some miracle. And so we had the capability, and for me, mentally, it was easier to go out and fill demand when I had enough or excessive supply, versus a lot of models will say, well, go out and generate the demand and then go build the supply. So I typically operate backwards from that because, frankly, I find it easier and less stressful, and I can speak with more confidence when I know I have the supply to back up this demand that I'm trying to drive. So, but that was 2008, and I didn't leave my day job until 2015 or 16, so maybe a little less than a decade. And I ran both companies I didn't run the printer company, but I worked there full time and ran this company for a lot of years there. And that was a little bit of necessity, obviously, to fund the startup. But I mentally wasn't ready to jump and to do this full time. So that was hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what was kind of the kicker that made you decide to, I guess, take a chance on running this company?
Well, two things. One, there are only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And so if this company was going to actually go somewhere, I had to dedicate more time. So Pickett Brass was basically calling my bluff on that. And then the day job was saying, well, if you want to get ahead, then you need to do more stuff. And, I understood that. And for about a year, I did part-time, which was very helpful to extend more time to this company. But at the end of the day, you were shortchanging both companies. And neither one of them was really going to be blown out of the water if you didn't dedicate one way or the other. So I had to make a choice. And, at the time, finances were fine. I have a couple of kids and, everything's stable. So here's your chance, right? Now or never. As opposed to saying, I'll do it when I retire. That's a death sentence. And so this was just, go ahead and do it. And because if you didn't do it, you were going to regret it. You were going to regret it. So now or never.
Okay, and Peter, what types of plans do you have for the future? I know you said you just redid lighting and you have those types of big ideas. So is there anything else you're working on now?
Sure. So about 3.5 years ago, we acquired the Blackburn Trumpet Company. It was a small company in Tennessee that we'd been friends with for a long time. And Cliff Blackburn, the founder, wanted to retire. And so we ended up acquiring his company and his tooling and know-how. And so we do manufacture full trumpets from scratch here, which is super exciting. But that company, when we purchased it, had a 30-plus year history and reputation. And so that was the right way to get into the instrument side of things. Very small company, though, and so we have to grow that organically just like we have the mouthpieces. And so that's the challenge here probably for the next decade, is to get a lot of those processes down more efficient and to, again, depend on that organic growth to grow that side of the business. It's a different business model.
Despite the learning curve Peter and his team had to overcome in selling the full instrument, he is now able to connect with musicians in a new way. He also said he plans to move to a larger location in the future. But as for final thoughts, Peter shares words of encouragement for others trying to start a business.
I think it's important to recognize the long-term nature of business building. I think a lot of people these days don't recognize that, and I think that can be frustrating day to day. You don't feel like you're making any progress. But you look back, again, this story makes a whole lot more sense looking back than looking forward, and so we constantly have to do that so that we don't get impatient and make really poor decisions. So I think that's probably true for any meaningful thing in life. It's not about instant success.
Starting a business is a scary thing to do, but Peter was able to grow his business slowly and organically before going all in. We hope you're inspired by Peter's story to build on your passions too. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.